In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only struggle, only pain, only death. It has been this way for millennia. It is a long-standing tradition among the Imperium of Man to burn and be burned. From the fires of our own creations does our destruction stare back at us. The instruments of our will so quickly turn to our downfall. And it has been this way since the dawn of time. Humanity's outward expansion among the stars, driven by artificial intelligences known as the Men of Iron, inorganic, unstoppable weapon systems revolted against us, decimated our galactic civilization, and drove us into a dark age. Our great crusade, born of noble ideals, wrapped in the iron fist of the conquering emperor, saw half his sons, his greatest creations, turn against him and lay waste to the Imperium that was. The Pharos Beacon, a saving grace in that heretical time, a trump card to be used against the traitors and unite the loyalists, used to draw in lost ships among the warp, was destroyed and drew intergalactic horrors to our galaxy to consume us all. Every time we take a step forward, we are driven two back. Humanity is humanity's greatest enemy. But what of the greatest heretic that there never was? A man who wielded power, both temporal and spiritual, throughout the Imperium. A psychotic, powerful tyrant who wielded a strength of arms not seen since the time of the Great Crusade. A madman whose power-mongering brought the Imperium to the brink of ruin once more. Humanity's most reprehensible Lord of Terror. Worlds burned, loyal servants executed, believers twisted to evil. One man who ushered in a reign of blood and terror, an age of apostasy and hate. This is that dark time, when the Imperium of Man was brought closer to the brink than it had been in millennia. This is the tale of Goge Vandire. Welcome one and all, I am Azazel, and for better or worse, you have stumbled your way onto my video detailing the Age of Apostasy and the reign of Goge Vandire. In total honesty, I began writing this as an entry on the Sisters of Battle, but as with everything in 40k, it snowballed. Once you begin reading, researching, and recalling fragments and tidbits of lore across books and codices spanning decades, well, you can understand why. That, and I have spent the last few days in a neck brace and pumped full of painkillers, hence no short story at the beginning of this entry, and if the rest of this entry seems disjointed, well, I hope you understand why. And I have no wish to give you an hour-and-a-half long video of me rambling. You have Luet in for that sort of thing, and he's an actual lore master, not a little entertainer working on a busted laptop in their bedroom. So, Sisters of Battle will be set aside, and the Age of Apostasy shall begin. Also, side note, Goge Vandire is an awesome villain name, but nothing will piss me off more than it not being Van Dire. Vandire is his surname as one word, instead of the, I think it's Dutch, Van Dire? It's a moderate inconvenience, but let me know if it bothers you as much as it bothers me. Quick shout out, I will be doing a giveaway once I reach 1,000 subscribers. If I haven't already by the time this video comes out, fingers crossed. So keep an eye out for that. And also, please drop a like, a comment, or a subscribe. It helps the channel and really does mean the world to me. With that said, let's dive in. Be prepared now. Steel your hearts and gird your minds as we enter the most horrific place imaginable. The place where hope goes to die and where thirsting gods rack the souls of billions, while directing madness on the stage of our galaxy as easily as puppeteers pull on strings. Welcome to the 36th millennium. Both in our world and the universe of 40k, There are few things more dangerous than true believers. Individuals whose inner light burns with a dedication to something greater than themselves. Faith in something greater can turn the tides of battles, rally a ragtag army, and intimidate enemies more numerous. It can drive someone to achieve the greatest of heights, to endure unimaginable pain and terror and push on through to the other side. It can also inspire the greatest of horrors, abominable actions justified by their belief in doing what is right, that in service to a cause, one can shift responsibility onto others. What happens when one holds the reins of power on those believers? When you control the masses through their faith and belief? When those serving you know that you not only hold the powers of life and death over them, but damnation and salvation as well? In that question lies a story. For those answers, we must undertake a journey through time. Rewind the clock of the galaxy to the largest upheaval since the Horus Heresy, in a time when blood was shed on holy terror itself, to an age of terror and a reign of blood, an era of politics and power and faith and fanaticism, an age of apostasy. In this age, the Imperium's dream was dead. The Emperor had been interred upon the Golden Throne for millennia. His sons were lost. His imperial truth, the rational system of thought that he had propagated among the stars within his realm that denounced the idea of religion, had failed. For he had insisted that gods were fictions among the galaxy. Daemons were nothing more than the night terrors of juveniles, the hallucinations of the mentally troubled, or the misinterpretations of depraved Xenos creatures that stalked among the darkness. Most importantly, he insisted that he was not a god. The irony. For in the aftermath of his fall, faith had grown. Like a forest fire, it had swept across world after world, promulgating his divinity, his righteousness. Cults and sects had formed across every inch of the galaxy, slowly moving from the minority to the majority, and eventually would become the compulsory. His ecclesiarchy, his church, was established through the success of the Temple of the Savior Emperor cult. One true religion with one true power base. A direct connection to the divine God Emperor through his teachings, his missionaries, his cardinals, and his ecclesiarch. The official, unified church followed the initial outburst of faith across the stars. It absorbed those who believed in similar doctrines and cemented its grip upon the Imperium's citizens. When it encountered those who believed in the divinity of the God Emperor, yet disagreed with the cult's fundamental tenets, it applied whatever means necessary to see its belief, the true belief, overcome any resistance. As with any official belief system, the High Lords of Terror recognized its power. Their power over the temporal required the support of various factions. In order to better facilitate a grip over the Imperium, they had to be seen to have a hold over the spiritual as well. So it was that the ecclesiarch, the head of the Emperor's church by divine providence, was made a seat on the Council of the High Lords of Terror, and so became known as the Adepta Ministorum. Thus began the reign of spiritualism, conservatism, and theocratic concerns within the Imperium of mankind. I will not bore you with too many details. Suffice to say that the ecclesiarchy grew too powerful, too potent, too greedy. The administratum of the Imperium, alongside some allies, wrested the reins of power away from the ecclesiarchy, weakening their monopoly on the Imperium, and beginning a feud that would last 7,000 years. The ecclesiarchy, sickened at its loss of power, eventually moved its entire base to the planet Ophelia 7. Far from the prying eyes and vice-like strictures of the administratum, the ecclesiarchy grew. Not just grew, but thrived, expanded and evolved. Tithes from the million worlds of the Imperium were raised, coffers were filled, planetary governors were drained dry with threats of military force and eternal damnation. Enormous continent-spanning cathedrals were constructed, edifices of glorious perfection towered over the populaces of worlds to remind imperial citizens to whom they truly owed their fealty, to their god emperor, and by proxy, the ecclesiarchy itself. And their armies grew. The Frateris Templars were raised from mere guards of the ecclesiarchy to fully fledged armies. Their numbers swelled, materials and ships multiplied, commercial and military fleets were formed, answerable only to the ecclesiarchy, and by extension, the ecclesiarch himself. After 300 years of unfettered growth and control, the ecclesiarchy returned to terror, stronger than ever before. Their word was law. By the divine right of the ecclesiarch, worlds were burned on account of heresy. Fleets were dispatched to seize control of what, in their opinion, rightfully belonged to the church. Assassins were dispatched to remove the heads of those who encouraged dissidents against the church. The ecclesiarchy ruled worlds with an iron fist that drank dry the resources of worlds to create ever larger cathedrals and churches with edifices that stretched towards their heavens and loomed over the common humanity. The administratum and the ecclesiarchy found themselves in the grips of a power struggle that threatened to tear the Imperium itself apart. For as they grappled over worlds, tithes, sectors and subsectors, devoted time and materials to thwarting one another's grasp at control, chaos overcame the Imperium. To add insult to injury, or perhaps more aptly, to add mayhem to murder, a warp storm blanketed the galaxy in a darkness not seen for eons. Planetary systems became insane. Was it the God Emperor's curse for turning from his light? A test to purge the unfaithful? Self-mutilation and flagellation cults sprang up, desperate to prove their innocence to their deity. Madness ruled. It was the precipice of civil war, until a man named Goge Vandire. He was the High Lord of the Administratum, a talented, intelligent, implacable, ruthless man. Brilliant in everything he did, severe in his actions. A staunch resistor of the Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy. No one could have suspected what his next steps would be. For he had previously engineered the rise of the most recent ecclesiarch, Paulus III, a puppet in place to control the ecclesiarchy, a dog on a leash to control the masses indirectly, an apt way to actively undermine the ecclesiarchy's plans. For many plotters and thinkers, this would be more than sufficient for their purposes, but it was not enough for him. It would never be enough for a man with a hole in his heart like Goge Vandire. One night, he and a retinue of Imperial Guard took the ecclesiarchal palace, executed Paulus III, and declared himself the new head of the Ministorum. Goge Vandire was now the new ecclesiarch. One man now held control of the Administratum and the Ministorum both. Powers both spiritual and temporal. The reins of authority in a single man in a scale not seen since the days of the Horus Heresy. As with all coups, there soon followed purges. Men and women were tracked down and executed. Many of the cardinals of the Holy Synod were systematically purged. Individuals whose loyalties were either unknown or confirmed to be against the new shift in power were hunted down and put to death. These positions of power were then filled with fawning sycophants at best. and power-crazed intellectuals with a streak for cruelty that mirrored Vandire's at worst. It was during this time that the Sisters of Battle came to be. For during his reign of terror and utter control, Vandire heard reports. For, ever as paranoid, powerful men are wont to do, he made information on potential enemies a high priority. In the case of the Ecclesiarchy, he had to know of any cults or sects throughout the Imperium that may pose a future threat to his church. From his spies, he received reports of a world known as Sanleor, an agri-world, nothing of great import, save a small cult of the faithful. A minor sect of women, worshipping the Emperor in their own way. Inner purity was their focus, a sense of belief, righteousness, and utter conviction while they honed their skills in ancient ways of war. They were everything that a charlatan like himself did not possess. Vandire, ever the cunning snake, saw an opportunity. He took with him a retinue, a show of divine strength. He met the cult upon the homeworld and declared himself the emissary of the God Emperor of mankind. As he had done on many worlds stranded throughout the Imperium, he expected one thing: absolute fealty. For he was a vain and arrogant man. If Vandire appeared, parades, celebrations, and shows of faith and loyalty were compulsory. If he failed to be satisfied, then excruciating agony, torture, and deaths would soon follow. As far as the Imperium should believe, he was the chosen, the anointed, the blessed. Until Sanleor, until the daughters of the Emperor. They were not impressed. These warriors, whose belief strictures followed inner purity, total focus, and dedication to their spiritual master, looked upon him and named him false. He was no emissary of their God Emperor. Vandire had burned entire populations for far fewer insults to himself. Yet, he had not fallen into insanity. Or if he had, he kept it under lock and key, the ever-pragmatic plotter, and was a guileful and deceitful man. He commanded one of his soldiers fire upon him to truly prove that he was chosen and protected by the Emperor himself. Should he not be the truly anointed emissary of their god, then he would fall. The las shot burst into a brilliant, blinding halo of light around Vandire, and there he stood unharmed. As one, the cult of the daughters of the Emperor fell to their knees in adoration and devotion. Here stood one whose very presence was guided and girded by their god. Faithful though they were not well versed in the technologies of the Empire of Mankind. They knew nothing of the conversion fields produced by his Rosarius, the defensive aegis that surrounded him thanks to technology. And they never would. All they saw was a man, protected and chosen by the divine to work his great will upon mankind. They were renamed the Brides of the Emperor and became Vandire's personal bodyguard, armed with new technologies, trained by the finest martial warriors within the Imperium. Their creed, belief, faith, and dedication became one of Vandire's finest weapons. Upon his orders, they beheaded those who plotted against him, burned those whom he singled out as heretic, and defended his person and his office against attack. To him was their total and utter allegiance, as he was their only true conduit to their master, their lord, their god. Their numbers grew throughout the Ecclesiarchy. Their reputation spread until they killed Goge Vandire. For Goge Vandire was insane. It began slowly. Perhaps power simply went to his head. Perhaps his playing at Ecclesiarch convinced him of divine providence, and he simply couldn't handle the tremendous lie. Perhaps he was always mad, and simply stopped hiding it. Yes, the burnings, the executions, and the announcements of heresy were insanity, but there was a rhyme and reason to them until this point. There was always an angle, a political calculation, an end objective to his violence and rage. When he broke Lord Phaedrus, the master of the Astra Telepathica, to his will, he was cruel, yes, but with an end objective. For Lord Phaedrus was a potent and gifted psyker, more than capable of seeing through Vandire's lies and deceits, a worthy adversary in the gauntlet of politicking. But Vandire would not, could not stand for adversaries, only total submission to his will. With the null abilities of a Calexus assassin, he lured the Psycholord into a trap and cut him off from his powers permanently. Such a shock to the system would kill a psyker as gifted as Lord Phaedrus, but with life-sustaining technologies, Vandire kept Phaedrus from death. A cripple of the mind. His identity, his personality, so synonymous with his abilities, was broken in 1,000 different ways. To Phaedrus, it was tantamount to cutting out a man's eyes, his tongue, deafening his ears, removing his arms and legs, and stuffing him inside of a box. For Phaedrus, life was a shallow, empty, horrifying experience to be cut off from his connection to the warp. So it was that Phaedrus attempted to kill himself. Not once, but again, and again, and again. Vandire was there every time to snatch the knife from his neck, to loosen the noose, to force a man dead inside to live as a shadow of his former self. Did he enjoy this cruelty? Did he bathe in the suffering from Phaedrus? Or was it cold and calculated until the end? More likely than not, what began as an objective plan became a baptism in sadism. Like a child ripping wings off insects to witness how long they would suffer in agony and despair. A thin end of a cruel and horrifying wedge. The cracks began to appear in Vandire's polished veneer. Sanity began to slip. Orders for burning those who would display some form of threat to his power now became ever more prevalent. He began to have fugue conversations with the Emperor of Mankind, where he would disappear, staring and mumbling into space. He began to mutter about traitors, heretics, and backstabbers at every turn. Goge Vandire's mask of sanity fell, revealing a deranged lunatic, a psychotic sadist, a sick, sickening man. It was then that another rose to prominence in the far reaches of the galaxy, a man known as Sebastian Thor. He was a preacher. He coveted no power, desired no lands, fostered no enmity between rivals. He was a believer, a man of faith whose zeal shone so purely and honestly that it echoed throughout the worlds of the Imperium. Sebastian Thor's faith was true, just, and bright. He could sway millions with his conviction and his words. His support swelled like a sunrise after darkest night, a chance of hope among worlds after the depredations of Goge Vandire, and Thor's ever-growing following became the Confederation of Light. Vandire, while insane, held enough of his faculties that he could still foresee trouble with this Thor, and dispatched an enormous fleet to deal with the threat before it became more than a minor annoyance. Those ships were swallowed in a warp storm that still rages to this day 4,000 years later. It is known as the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, and the screams of a million soldiers can still be heard if the warp-touched listen closely, as those within that forgotten and damned fleet suffer eternal agony. World after world pledged their support to the Confederation of Light and Sebastian Thor, so moved by his words and disgusted with the current ecclesiarchy. It was easy. Vandire's power crumbled, world by world, sector by sector, until only his hold over Terra remained. Vandire, a paranoid, wretched imitation of the glorious visage he had once presented to the Imperium, dissolved the High Council of Terra to silence those voices that claimed his illegitimacy, damned his actions, and called for him to be held accountable. He then demanded that all the forces under his command, diminished though they were, launch attacks on the Adeptus Mechanicus and those Astartes legions who had dared to threaten his power. His forces, far more sane than Vandire himself, refused, perhaps out of ideological reasons, or perhaps in order not to be annihilated by the inordinate strength of the Astartes and Mechanicus. Perhaps both. For what man, what standard human man would willingly put themselves on the front line against Astartes? Those who still possessed their sanity and refused had to flee or be executed for heresy. With no other options left, the Terran Crusade began. 4 legions of the... Legions? No, they weren't legions, they were chapters. 4 chapters of the Adeptus Astartes, the Black Templars, the Imperial Fists, the Soul Drinkers and the Fire Hawks, and the forces of the Fabricator General of Mars launched their fleets to Terra to lay siege to the Ecclesiarchal Palace and depose the mad heretic. There, in his Ecclesiarchal Palace, his last stand would begin. Though the fortress was in tatters, decades without care and attention had allowed portions to crumble into disrepair, it was still a formidable defensive structure. And inside were the mad zealots, loyal to Vandire, crazed warriors tattooed and carved skin from head to toe with religious symbols. They were not sound of mind. They felt no fear, only an overwhelming desire to defend their holy place. Only them, and the brides of the Emperor, manned the Ecclesiarchal Palace. The Terran Crusade raged. However, most importantly, and most vitally, the Adeptus Custodes, faithful bodyguards of the Emperor, stirred. For their place was the Imperial Palace, the other side of Terra. Secluded from the politics of the Imperium, their role was to watch and to protect. After failing to protect their master during the Horus Heresy, they found absolution in isolation and fervent duty to their lord and master. Only now, thanks to the contact of the Space Marine chapters, did they learn of the damage that Vandire was wreaking upon their master's Imperium. Through subterranean depths and hidden vaults, through forgotten passages known only to the Emperor's chosen, they emerged within the Ecclesiarchal Palace. There, before the door to Vandire's refuge, stood the brides of the Emperor, his last bodyguards, his final faithful, his ultimate hope. Devoted warrior spirit called to devoted warrior spirit, for the Custodes could see a kinship with these women, could feel that these warriors were pure of heart, fierce of faith, incorruptible in their zeal for the Emperor. They called a truce, a parley, a discussion. For an hour, the Custodes requested them to step aside. They revealed the awful truths of Vandire's actions, of his corruption. The brides of the Emperor refused to listen. So blessed in determination were they that they could not be swayed. Their devotion was unheard of. Their faith implacable. Lacking alternatives, the Centurion of the Custodes proposed another course of action. Something that would alter the dynamic of the Imperium of Man forever. He left his warriors there and guided the leader of the brides of the Emperor, Age Dominica, to the throne room itself. An honor unheard of, for the Custodes allow none to enter his presence. Arriving before the doors, Age Dominica and her bodyguards, Arabella, Catherine, Lucia, Mina, and Silvana, entered the throne room and stood before their god emperor on the golden throne. None know what happened in those hallowed halls, or if they do not speak of it. What is there to say when one meets their god? When one devotes their lives to the contemplation and service of the divine, only to come face to face with that being, to learn the greatest answer to the most puzzling question humanity has ever held within their souls. All that is known is that they emerged differently than how they entered. They entered as pilgrims, supplicants, worshippers, warrior bodyguards sworn to surface, united by a belief. They emerged, eyes burning with a newfound hatred. They were repulsed at Vandire, at his ecclesiarchy, at his treachery. Hearts aflame with newfound devotion and faith, they were reborn. No longer Vandire's brides of the Emperor, but returned once more and sanctified under the eyes of their god as the daughters of the Emperor. They were cleansed, absolved, and steeled beneath the gaze of their deity. They renounced their vows to the ecclesiarch and returned with the custodian to Vandire. There they entered his final redoubt. His disheveled, twisted veneer ranted and raved that they should leave and strike down his foes and enemies. Age Dominica glared at this fake, this fraud, this false prophet. Hate burning as a passion that could set worlds to flame, she spoke her words to Goge Vandire. You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name and almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have perverted and twisted the path he has laid for mankind to tread. As your own decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such a crime, no pity for such a criminal. I renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence has been long overdue, and now it is time for you to die. There, Goge Vandire spoke his last words. A wretch of a man, barely in touch with reality. I don't have time to die. I'm too busy. Alicia's sword swept down and struck Vandire's head from his body. The Rosarius, the one with the conversion field generator that had hoodwinked those daughters of the Emperor on San Leor, the one whose power had sheltered him for nigh on 100 years, failed. By luck, fate, or divine intervention, it was torn in twain along with his neck. Thus did the hand of righteous fury purge the Imperium's own worst enemy in millennia, and end Goge Vandire's reign of blood. So it was that Sebastian Thor and his Covenant of Light supplanted both the Ecclesiarch and the leading tenets of the Emperor's Church. So unthinkable it was that war had been once more waged on the soils of Holy Terror. Sweeping reformations spread through the Imperium, but for none more so than the Ecclesiarchy itself. For the Ecclesiarchy shifted radically. No longer would the Church focus on temporal issues, but instead moved to cover the spiritual well-being of the Imperium. The theology of the ecclesiarchy itself would be supplanted by the belief systems of the Covenant of Light, and the vast majority of Vandire's reforms were declared null and void. Independent High Lords were reinstated on the High Council, and the Administratum was now truly separated from the Ministorum. Balance began to return to the Imperium. There were more severe alterations included. The Frateris Templar were disbanded, its men and fleets released from the control of the Ministorum. Never again would the Church maintain an army of zealots with such power to face down the entirety of the Imperium itself. Sebastian Thor enacted the Decree Passive, which stated that the ecclesiarchy would forever bear no men under arms. However, this loophole did not extend to the daughters of the Emperor, for, well, obvious reasons. Their skill, devotion, and purity would be the perfect example of Thor's new church, and as the Adepta Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle would become the new Orders Militant of the ecclesiarchy. 2 other offices were created in the aftermath of the Age of Apostasy. The first was the Ordo Hereticus. This inquisitorial body was tasked with the sole purpose of investigating and hunting down all those who opposed the Emperor's will, regardless of their station, position, or power. They would be the ultimate tool to prevent another Vandire, to prevent another civil war. Quis custodiet ipsos custodes? Who watches the watchers? The second, far more specific to Vandire's abuse of power, would be an organization dedicated to monitoring the use of Imperial assassins. No longer could one such as he abuse the powers at their disposal and use the Imperium's most valuable killers in order to accumulate authority and rid themselves of potential enemies. The Ordo Sicarius was born, although this was not instigated immediately, but rather in the aftermath of the Wars of Vindication, which saw the Assassinorum tear itself apart in anarchy in the immediate aftermath of the Age of Apostasy. However, that entire escapade was only made possible by Vandire's corruption and coercion of many high-ranking officials within the Assassinorum, so I'm blaming that entirely on Vandire. In fact, Vandire is directly responsible for a great many atrocities after his death. Yes, with his beheading, the Age of Apostasy could be considered over, the Imperium's greatest internal threat removed entirely. And yet the machine of the Imperium is so vast, so complex, and so needlessly intertwined that it is like stacks and stacks of dominoes reaching out from Terra. The actions that Vandire took required a long time to act upon, and once removed, that did not stop the stacks from falling. Across the Imperium, high-ranking officials of his corrupt ecclesiarchy rushed to the farthest edges of sectors and worlds and continued their reigns of terror, skinning populations alive, rigging ruling families to machines that would shock their nervous systems into sporadic actions and more. Vandire's legacy lived on far beyond his years. With that said, I do believe that is a convenient place to stop. Should we continue on to the incredible escapades of Alicia Dominica and her heroic death? Should we cover the Wars of Vindication, where subtlety and subterfuge among assassins caused chaos and destruction worthy of the Alpha Legion itself? Should we discuss the Custodes and their interference in political affairs and the long-lasting effects it had on the balance of power? Well, maybe another time. But for now, we can enjoy one of the rarest moments in 40k. A happy one. A dark, cruel, insane heretic has been laid low by warriors of purity and faith. A civil war managed not to tear Terra apart at this point. And Sebastian Thor, by most accounts one of the most morally righteous individuals within the setting, has begun reforms to the ecclesiarchy. Enjoy it. For if there is one constant truth in this dark universe, death, torment, madness, tragedy, and agony are only moments away, and they will arrive very soon. With that said, thank you for listening. Do please drop a like, a comment, or a subscribe. It means everything to me and to the channel. And if you'd like to follow my socials, I'm Azazel's Secrets everywhere, because character limits suck. Now, do enjoy your day or night, and I hope you've indulged in some escapism from reality. For that's why we are here, isn't it? Until next time.